In Georgie and Mandy's first marriage, the moment Georgie finally realizes he may have made the biggest mistake of his entire marriage. And honestly, this changes everything for the future of Georgie and Mandy. Because for the first time, Georgie isn't just dealing with stress, money problems, or family drama. He's finally forced to confront something much more painful, the possibility that he's slowly losing Mandy. And the worst part? He didn't even notice it happening until it was almost too late. So let's break down the full story, the emotional turning points, the hidden meaning behind Georgie's actions, and why this would completely reshape their marriage moving forward. The episode begins in classic Georgie and Mandy fashion. Funny, chaotic, and awkward. Georgie walks into the kitchen trying to act cheerful, while Mandy is clearly exhausted. She's juggling breakfast, preparing for work, handling the baby, and trying to keep the house from falling apart. Meanwhile, Georgie is distracted, not because he doesn't care, but because he's obsessed with work problems. His mind is completely focused on making more money, keeping the business alive, and proving himself as a husband and father. But Mandy notices something important immediately. He's physically there, but emotionally absent. And throughout the first half of the episode, the writers quietly show how disconnected Georgie has become from his marriage. Every conversation between them feels rushed. Every romantic moment gets interrupted. Every attempt Mandy makes to talk seriously gets brushed aside. At first, Georgie thinks everything is fine. In his mind, he's sacrificing for family. He believes working harder automatically makes him a good husband. But Mandy doesn't want a provider. She wants a partner. And that difference becomes the emotional core of the episode. One of the smartest things about this story is how realistic it feels. Neither Georgie nor Mandy is presented as the villain. Mandy isn't angry because Georgie is lazy. Georgie isn't cruel or uncaring. Instead, the episode explores a much more painful reality. Sometimes relationships slowly break down because two people stop understanding each other. And honestly, that makes this episode hit even harder. There's one scene in particular that completely changes the tone of the story. Mandy is sitting alone late at night after putting the baby to sleep. Georgie comes home exhausted, barely paying attention, and immediately starts talking about work again. He doesn't ask how her day was. He doesn't notice she's upset. He doesn't even realize she's been crying. And when Mandy quietly says, "You don't see me anymore," the entire atmosphere changes. That line destroys Georgie. At first, he tries to defend himself. He explains he's working hard for their future. He says everything he's doing is for the family. But Mandy's response is heartbreaking. She tells him she never asked him to carry everything alone. That's the moment Georgie finally starts realizing something is seriously wrong. Because for the first time, he understands Mandy doesn't feel loved anymore. She feels invisible. What makes this episode so powerful is that Georgie genuinely thought he was doing the right thing. In his mind, being a good husband meant solving problems financially, making sacrifices, working nonstop, taking responsibility. But Mandy needed emotional support, communication, and presence. And Georgie completely missed that. The writers do an incredible job showing how emotional neglect can happen without bad intentions. Georgie never meant to hurt Mandy, but pain caused accidentally still hurts. And once that realization hits him, you can actually see the panic on his face. Suddenly, all the little moments throughout the season start replaying in his mind. The dinners he skipped, the conversations he ignored, the promises he forgot, the nights Mandy felt alone. For the first time, Georgie realizes his marriage isn't struggling because of one huge fight. It's struggling because of hundreds of tiny moments that slowly created emotional distance. And honestly, that realization might be the most mature moment Georgie has ever had as a character. One thing the show continues to do brilliantly is connect Georgie's emotional struggles to his childhood. Deep down, Georgie has always believed that being a man means carrying pressure silently. That mindset comes directly from how he grew up. He watched adults around him constantly struggle with money, responsibility, and survival. Vulnerability was never something openly discussed. So when Georgie feels overwhelmed, he does what he thinks men are supposed to do: work harder, talk less, hide stress. Unfortunately, that approach slowly damages his marriage. because Mandy interprets his silence as emotional distance. And honestly, she's not wrong. One emotional scene perfectly captures this conflict. Georgie sits alone after an argument with Mandy and finally admits to someone that he's terrified of failing as a husband and father. That moment matters because Georgie rarely admits fear. Usually, he hides insecurity behind humor or confidence. But here, the audience sees how overwhelmed he really is, and it makes his mistakes feel human instead of selfish. The middle portion of the episode becomes incredibly emotional because Georgie starts trying to fix things, but realizes it's not as easy as saying sorry. That's the painful reality of relationships. Sometimes damage builds up slowly over time. One apology can't instantly erase months of emotional disconnect. Georgie tries doing thoughtful things for Mandy. He attempts romantic gestures, offers help around the house, and even starts opening up emotionally. But Mandy is cautious, not because she hates him, because she's exhausted. And honestly, that detail makes the writing feel incredibly authentic. Mandy still loves Georgie. You can see it in every scene. But love alone doesn't automatically fix emotional burnout. At one point, Mandy tells him something devastating. She says she misses the version of him who used to actually talk to her. That line completely crushes Georgie because he realizes she's right. Somewhere along the way, he stopped treating Mandy like his best friend and started treating marriage like a responsibility checklist. Provide money? Check. Handle problems? Check. Protect the family? Check. But emotionally connecting with his wife, he stopped prioritizing it. And that realization becomes the true turning point of the episode. What makes this storyline especially important is how it sets up future problems for the marriage. Because now Georgie understands something terrifying. Losing someone emotionally happens gradually. There isn't always one giant dramatic moment. Sometimes people simply drift apart while convincing themselves everything is okay. And for the first time, Georgie sees that possibility becoming real. There's a scene near the end where he watches Mandy laughing with someone else while completely ignoring him. Nothing inappropriate happens. But Georgie notices something painful. She seems happier when she forgets he's around. That realization shakes him deeply, because he finally understands emotional loneliness can exist even inside a marriage. And honestly, this might be one of the most emotionally mature stories the show has ever told. Instead of relying on exaggerated sitcom misunderstandings, the writers focus on emotional realism, the fear of growing apart, the exhaustion of parenting, the pressure of responsibility, the pain of feeling unseen. That's why this episode feels so relatable. Another important detail is how Mandy handles the situation. She doesn't explode dramatically. She doesn't threaten divorce immediately. Instead, she reaches a quiet emotional limit. And sometimes that's even scarier. Because when someone stops fighting loudly, it often means they're emotionally exhausted. Georgie slowly realizes Mandy has been carrying emotional pain for a long time without saying everything out loud. That guilt completely overwhelms him, especially when he starts noticing how often she sacrificed her own needs to support him. The episode subtly reminds viewers that Mandy gave up a lot too. Her independence, her plans, her stability. And while Georgie focused on financial pressure, Mandy quietly carried emotional pressure alone. That balance makes both characters sympathetic. Nobody is completely right. Nobody is completely wrong. They're simply two overwhelmed people struggling to stay connected while life keeps pushing them apart. The final act of the episode delivers one of the most emotional Georgie moments in the entire series. After spending the entire episode trying to defend himself, Georgie finally stops making excuses. And honestly, that's huge character growth. Instead of saying, "I work hard for this family," he finally says, "I forgot to be there for you." That single moment changes everything. Because Mandy doesn't need perfection. She just needed him to understand her pain. And for the first time in the episode, she finally sees genuine emotional honesty from him. The scene becomes even more powerful because Georgie admits he was so focused on becoming a successful provider that he forgot marriage is also about emotional presence. That realization breaks him emotionally. You can actually feel his fear that he may have already damaged a relationship too much. And the show wisely avoids giving a perfect fairy tale resolution. Mandy doesn't instantly forgive everything. Instead, the episode ends with cautious hope. They sit together quietly after finally having an honest conversation, something they haven't truly done in a long time. And while the problems aren't magically solved, there's finally emotional understanding again. That's what makes the ending feel earned. But here's the bigger reason this episode matters for the future of the series. Georgie is finally evolving emotionally. For a long time, he approached adulthood with confidence, charm, and survival instincts. But emotional maturity? That's been his biggest weakness. This episode forces him to confront that weakness directly, because marriage isn't just about surviving hard times together. It's about staying emotionally connected during those hard times. And Georgie finally realizes love can slowly fade if you stop nurturing it. That lesson may completely change how he handles future conflict with Mandy. At the same time, the episode also shows why Mandy and Georgie still work as a couple despite their struggles. Even after all the pain, they still want to understand each other. That emotional foundation is still there, and honestly, that's what makes fans continue rooting for them. Their relationship feels messy, imperfect, stressful, emotional, and real, not idealized. Real. The acting also deserves huge credit here. The emotional restraint in these scenes makes everything feel more believable. Instead of screaming matches or dramatic breakdowns, most of the pain is shown through silence, hesitation, and disappointment. That subtle approach makes the emotional moments hit even harder, especially Georgie's expressions once he realizes Mandy has emotionally checked out more than he understood. You can literally see regret taking over him scene by scene. And Mandy's exhaustion feels heartbreakingly realistic. She doesn't seem angry anymore. She seems tired. That emotional difference matters, because anger can sometimes be repaired quickly. Exhaustion takes much longer to heal. By the end of the episode, Georgie finally understands a huge mistake he made in his marriage. Not cheating, not betrayal, not dishonesty. Something quieter, but just as dangerous. He stopped emotionally showing up for the person he loves most. And once he realizes that, everything changes. Now the real question becomes, can Georgie rebuild the emotional connection he slowly allowed to fade, or has the damage already gone too far? That's what makes the storyline so compelling moving forward, because now the marriage feels fragile in a realistic way. Not broken, but vulnerable. And honestly, that may create some of the best storytelling the series has ever done.